to be joined by Adam Leviton, who will be talking to you about hybrid dilemma using infrastructure as information architecture. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC15. After the webinar, we will have questions. Type any questions you have for Adam in the question pane in the control panel. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass over to our webinar presenter, Adam Leviton. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Declan. Thanks for having me. Well, thank you all for attending. We have a great group of attendees from all across the world, some familiar to me as I look through the names, and some definitely not. I'm very excited not only to be on this webinar, but to be presenting in 2015 at the European SharePoint Conference, so hopefully you'll join us there also. Just a little background of me. Currently, I am a product manager at Metalogix, focusing on our replicator and diagnostic manager tools that do exactly what they say, replicate content across SharePoint farms, and also diagnose and optimize your SharePoint environments. So I come from a background of almost 10 years of SharePoint consulting. I started building forms, yes, in InfoPath, and worked my way up to building infrastructures, whether it was the actual server infrastructure or the information architecture with navigation and taxonomy. So I really, this topic is very close to my heart, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did putting it together. Also, I wanted to highlight even further than Declan had that please ask questions throughout. This is a live webinar, and to give you the most value, would love to be able to get your questions as they come up. We might not be able to get with all of them, and I will work with Declan to answer them in a blog that will be posted on the SharePoint community. So ask away. Any question will do. We might not be able to get to all of them, but we will in some form of communication. All right, so enough about me. It's time to ask you all a question. So, what's your hybrid situation? So we're going to have two polls today. You will now see it on your screen, and would really like you to go in and participate. And what this will do is it will help me tailor the information to your needs and the attendees that are on this call, and then the attendees who view the recording will benefit from seeing the poll results and knowing how we changed the webinar live. So we have quick voting. Thank you very much. I will wait about 30 more seconds. Currently, right now, the vast majority is unsure about implementing hybrid. Great. And then the next runner-up is already in a hybrid environment, and the third is planning. And actually, the laggard is planning it in the next 6 months. All right, I'll give 15 more seconds. We're at 90%. Come on, it's that last 5 people or so. All right, I'll close down the poll so that we can share the results here. And again, so as you saw, the 44% are unsure about implementing hybrid, 28 are already in a hybrid situation, and 22% are planning. Great. So that's actually interesting to me. In most of my presentations, we don't have the amount of people who are unsure, but I will focus a little bit more then on the deciding factors as we go through the scenario here. So thank you for permitting and for participating, and we will continue to have that throughout the session. So I'm going to hide that, we'll come back and we will talk about the agenda for today. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go over what is infrastructure and information architecture, just to make sure that we're level set on what we're talking about. Then we're going to talk about a real life scenario. It has been scrubbed and it has been generalized so that all participants can gain value of it, and it's not too specific for any one group. Then we'll talk about the solution, and during the solution conversation, what we're going to be doing is going through each piece and key consideration that will apply to the people who are unsure about going to hybrid, and every one of us planning for the future. And then, of course, we will answer any questions that haven't been asked throughout the session. So, all right. Let's talk about infrastructure. So first of all, we have to talk about on-premises. And the first key thing is here, don't drop the S. I've been corrected so many times because it's not a premise, it's not an idea, it's on-premises. It's structural and behind your firewall. Usually you're using capital outlay for budgeting, and really it's powered by your internal team. So this is where you have your network engineer, your architect, everyone is under your control. Okay, you might be consulting or what have you, but they're all your staff. And so for what I did today here was took some general areas so that we can compare against other types of infrastructures. So here again, depicted in green, you can see that you have control all the way from your networking, plumbing, infrastructure, storage, hardware, software, virtualization, all the way up to your application features, permissions, management. Trying to make this a little general, specific to SharePoint, you can imagine it would be the creation of sites, it would be the ability to create templates, the master page or what have you could fit into that bucket there. So I think on-premises is pretty straightforward. We know this all too well. It's what we're living in right now. So next we have hosted, or otherwise known as infrastructure as a service. So I like this a little icon on the right that we have the square brackets as a service. It seems that you can put any name in front of as a service nowadays. And the truth is this has been having hosted organizations for, I don't even want to talk about it, 20, 25 years, right? Where someone else owns the plumbing, the back end. And so here, while in on-premises everything was green, now you can see red, and not a good or bad, but a way to demonstrate control. Now this hosted company is controlling virtualization, is controlling server hardware, of course the storage in the back end. You might be able to request specific levels of service, but you are not in charge of it, so their staff. So this is not necessarily a capital outlay because you're not purchasing hardware. You can imagine that this is Azure or AWS. And you'll notice here in the bottom right corner, and you'll see this for the rest of them, we have networking is red and green. And I think something for hybrid is that you're always connected and you're always dependent on your provider and your internal when you're talking about networking, because lumped into networking is also Active Directory and authentication and how you're federating your services and your two separate networks. So there's always a piece of that is connected. So that's hosted. The next that we have is managed. Now, managed can be called either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. It depends on which company you go with and what level of service that you are going with. So you can imagine here in the United States, Rackspace, FQWeb, Dell, major players in this, and using the most broadest example, we'll go to platform as a service, and there you're only managing the application features, the applications you install on those servers, and maybe the services that are running to support those applications. So everything else is outsourced. You don't have control. This can be good or bad, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're a development company, product company like Metalogix, or if you're a consumer trying to share documents, different sets of needs. So this is managed hosting. Then finally, let's talk about the familiar cloud software. So of course, this is software as a service, right? So you have no choice here. All you are able to do is you are able to manage the application features. So this is Salesforce, Dropbox, Google Docs, and of course Office 365. Again, you'll notice that I've continued to put networking in green because you're interconnected and you have to have a network that connects to theirs. Whether you're just borrowing from the cable company and have a pipe, or you have a sophisticated network, there's always interconnected no matter where you are. But cloud is software as a service, you have little to no control anymore, which is okay because you're also paying or not paying a premium to be able to have that control. So that's cloud software. Well, I sort of fibbed a little bit because it's not the final version. You're here for hybrid, right? So I'd like to stress something for people who said they're unsure about moving to hybrid. That's sort of a trick question because you're probably unsure about moving to the cloud and doing cloud hybrid. And Microsoft has done a really huge job of spinning the conversation about hybrid towards their version of hybrid, which is on-premises Microsoft to cloud Microsoft, specifically Office 365. You could say Azure too, but really Office 365 is the major push of the marketing machine that we know and love. But I love this little explanation here. Hybrid is anything that has two kinds of components. Period. Done. It doesn't matter if it's cloud or on-premise. And so I'd like to take a second and say some of you are probably already doing hybrid. So pat yourself on the back. Might be a hard thing to do, but pat yourself on the back and look at the different ways that you already have been doing hybrid. And why I like to bring this up, and this is a different session, but is to look at what you're doing and apply that to the decision. How have you gotten to the point where you can manage multiple systems? How have you been able to balance the requirements? And again, in this scenario, we will go through a real life use case, but you already have some of these answers. And so you can see here, it's not just online to on-premise. Cloud to cloud is another hybrid because you have some of the same obstacles, but certainly cross-version SharePoint. I know with large organizations, they have different departments, and different departments are at different levels of SharePoint usage, and they might have their own internal IT teams. So this is something we see a lot, and especially with replication, we focus on being able to move from any level of SharePoint to any level of SharePoint to be able to allow that content to move easily. So congratulations, you have been doing hybrid. All right, great. I'll remind you, please ask any questions that come to mind. If there's a current situation that you'd like to have clarity on or a professional opinion, please add those questions in. Let's go a little bit to information architecture. And so I really love this diagram. Have used the link to the right if you want to find out the great people who've created it. And so here, it really shows the purpose of information architecture, and I'll read it, connecting people to content that they're looking for. And so let's take this into the broader spectrum, and that's why we're here today. Information architecture applied to infrastructure as buckets. So, you're going to go through the process of classifying your content, whether it is compliant information, whether it is regulatory, whether it is for a team or for the enterprise. You'll have labels, whether it is a policy or whether it is a memo. And how you find this information is important. And I think when you're talking about infrastructure, it's about communication and using tools to allow people to jump from one tool to the next. And certainly search in the traditional sense allows people with the classification, with the labeling, to find information. But in the infrastructure realm, it's more about communicating and letting them know where they, I'll use the term, physically have to go. So information architecture is taking all of these concepts and putting them into place. And again, I think in your current hybrid scenarios where you're using multiple tools for very similar things, you've gone through this process, but you've probably not thought of it as information architecture. And yes, I'm stressing this. I hope you're having as much fun as I am with this phrase, but I think it's a great way to look at how you apply these information architecture principles when you're making decisions. All right, so let's talk about this actual scenario. So what were the business needs? Again here, I've neutralized it a little bit and tried to get to the exaggerated perspective of the users. So, users just want their information. They, aren't into excuses by IT that there are security issues, that there are cost issues. It's their information. They want it now. They want easy to use access. They want to be able to manage and find the information the way it makes sense to them. And here's where the balance is, right? There are some corporate needs that are for intellectual property, that are, this was and still is, a regulatory environment. And I have to tell you, there are a lot of users who are just ignoring governmental regulations, both in England and in the United States. And why are they doing that? You're wondering why this big golden credit card is here? Well, they've already purchased it. So a big part of this scenario is that the users were unsatisfied with information technologies service, information technology solutions, and I think the key differentiator between the current hybrid and past incarnations is that with a credit card, your users can go out and solve their IT needs. I've also heard this talked about as shadow IT, but really amazing difference, right? They could buy Office 365 subscriptions. I've seen that. I've seen a lot of Google Docs either for free or subscriptions. And, not that users want to put their company at risk, but they want to be able to do their job. And so this is really, the business needs overarching. There, of course, were some specific applications. There certainly were workflows and processes and procedures and finance and specific needs. But overall, the business needs were to satisfy the ability for users to use the right technology for what they wanted to do. And so let's talk about the technical concerns. So, us as technologists, we want all the users to be engaged and active, no matter where they are or how they connect. We want to provide the best possible speed and access to content, especially, if there are the disruptions, whether it's us taking the system down for fixing it, but also on top of that, where users sometimes overlook is we want to be able to keep confidential information shared, internally with partners, with outside agencies, but in approved environments and safe. And another thing that as a SharePoint user and subject matter expert I've seen over the last 10 years is, it's important to keep information authoritative. And, what is the real final document? And I've seen this save so much time if you can work with the users to commit to a process. And so, that's the motivation of information technology, or I certainly hope it is, to work with the different organizations. But you also have quite literally technical concerns, right? So in this organization, they were worldwide, East Coast United States, West Coast United States, actually one facility in Middle America, several in United Kingdom, some in Norway and Sweden, and one in China. So they had distribution across various different types of networks. They had their own network topology, but there was latency, and they had some issues with challenged connectivity. So you might complain about using SharePoint when you're sitting next to it. Imagine trying to use a SharePoint farm when you're in England and the SharePoint farm is underpowered and in the United States. Yes, I did just say that, and that's why I've removed any reference to companies so I can speak freely. And that's what was happening. In England, people were complaining about SharePoint because of the speed, and in China, they were just not using it at all. So IT was challenged with understanding what was being used or why it wasn't being used, setting up the service level agreements, understanding authentication, authorization, and permissions. And another thing that when you're talking about hybrids, so for that majority of people on the call who are unsure, one of the really interesting things is taking into consideration your current licensing. If we're talking specifically about Microsoft, they're not very flexible right now. That if you're already in a 3-year cycle, if you're already in an enterprise agreement, they're not going to let you get out of that to go to the cloud. Now, maybe that's changing. I haven't talked to a rep about pricing in the last month or so, but it was mainly this that you would have to either double pay if you wanted to move immediately, or a lot of people are waiting and planning for a new enterprise agreement. So that was maybe misplaced as a technical concern, but it was for the information technology and the CIO and not for the business users, even though they were using the credit card, as we had said. So let's take a look at a technical inventory, and this is probably very similar to some of your experiences. So what did they have? They actually had Exchange 2007. They had standard mailboxes, they had shared mailboxes supporting automated business processes, and they had regulatory archives. So there are more specifics in here about the compliance and regulatory that they need, but their archives were very specific on what needed to be kept and how long it needed to be kept. Then, of course, they had SharePoint. Why would we be here if we didn't have SharePoint? And they had some custom SharePoint 2010 workflows. They had a regulatory document repository, so there were some hardware specifics. The whole farm had to meet regulatory standards, and also for authentication they were using Active Directory federated services. So, fairly sophisticated, broad network, redundant, lots of servers, and that's also why they were looking about how the cloud could benefit them and if they had any cost savings, and they certainly did in the long run, even with the complexity that you'll see. So another thing I just want to highlight a little bit is, so what are their challenges again? So when you're planning for cloud, remember that you're only as fast as the network. The good thing about Office 365 is that it is not just a service, but it is actually a networking infrastructure. So of the farms that you have your servers at, even if you're in the England farm, and I'll just use that in general, and you're in the United States, you actually, the networking will go to the closest United States farm and then go on internal traffic to the UK farm and vice versa. If you're in England or Europe and come into the United States. So that's good. However, if you have low bandwidth, you still have low bandwidth to the cloud. And so you have to take that into consideration, what's going to be best for your users. And we see this a lot with small farms being set up in distributed environments and then synchronizing content so that you're not worried, even with cloud. So that was one of their challenges. Another challenge was, well, these people, the business users, had purchased several tools, and it was just really hard to integrate content, again, that authoritative information, what was right. And then, as I said before too, it's across the world, right? So, common scenario for us, headquarters to ship, ship to shore, headquarters to headquarters if there's a European and American headquarters. So not only multiple technologies, but again, across the globe. And I think I've described how they were set up all across. So let's talk about you for a second, and we're going to have our second poll, and we're going to ask, what are the challenges you're most concerned about? We'll take about another 30 seconds. The winner so far is security of data. And, I don't specifically go into details here about regulations, but certainly in Europe, and I'm sure America will catch up, there are requirements for keeping information within the country of origin. And this is something we're working on to be able to help you, again, synchronize across from a cloud to on-premise if you need to store that data. All right, a few more seconds and we'll share the results. Very interesting. So as I just mentioned, the lead winner was security of data, then low bandwidth, high latency. And we see that a lot, and then tied were the geographically distributed environments and disaster recovery of content. So thank you again for participating. You guys are a great group to answer so quickly. And with that, please again type in some questions as they come up, and I'd love to be able to answer them. I'm going to, because the answer was so huge here, integrity and security of data, I think when you're talking about being able to access the data, I think that the cloud is as, if not more, secure than your network. And the question, though, is are you making it easier for someone to forget their password or misplace their password or reuse their password? Because something that is not new but is coming to light is, insider threats. That a lot of the break-ins, Target, Anthem, even Sony, were done by humans and not by the technical capability of the systems themselves. So I think that's something to take into consideration. There are a lot of great presentations, and I'll try to weave that in here a bit as we go on. So again, thank you for participating and keep on asking questions. So the solution, let's see if you can hear this, drum roll, is infrastructure as information architecture. And again, I love acronyms. I've worked in the US government for a while, so this is sort of tongue-in-cheek, but a way of shorthand thinking of the process that it takes to build a hybrid solution. So let's take a look at what this IT's next generation infrastructure looked like. So we're not going to give away what's inside because I'm going to go through each key consideration and apply the key consideration to where they put information. So here, what they resulted with is still SharePoint Server 2010. Then SharePoint 2013 and Exchange. And finally, the cloud. And in the cloud, they actually settled on a combination of Office 365, OneDrive for Business, and Dropbox. Because a lot of people were already using Dropbox, there wasn't a valuable reason to go off it, and because of the integration. So I'll stop for a second. Great question about one of the concerns about the staff that you vetted while cloud staff isn't your own. And that's a really interesting one, and I'm sure we could have a long discussion. But I think one of the things, I'll use the Microsoft architecture because I know it well, is that it's called Fort Knox. And it is, you probably all heard of shredded storage. Basically, your information is taken, as I, not a storage expert, likes to describe it, is shredded. All of your information is shredded from your shared tenant into multiple servers in a football pitch. Your football, not ours. Actually, similar size, of course, and it's probably about 2 football pitches size of a server farm. And so while, yes, there is still a human element, in my opinion, they could steal racks and racks of servers, which would be pretty hard, and they wouldn't be able to get the data. Yes, there's still probably a weak link somewhere. But also the other thing is Office 365 was late to the game. Google was in first, but they have to be certified for different government agencies, different corporate agencies, so that vetting process is getting stronger and stronger. And I think your question about staff, that is your own, is also how you could do hybrid, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So thank you for asking a question. Hope I answered it satisfactorily, and you can certainly contact me at collabadam or alevithan@matalogics.com if you want to talk more. Keep the questions coming. All right, so I want to just take one aside and talk about moving workloads. And so the way I look at workloads is across type of content and is the audience. And so, is it temporary? Is it to a record? Is the type of content? And then, of course, the audience goes from an individual to an enterprise. And, this is sort of an ideal utopian situation where you would use instant messaging or Skype for Business in a certain way. You would use email only for a little bit of information. You would use news feeds. So you can see this is a distribution of workloads, and we're about to use this. One thing, again, I'll highlight here is, identity and authentication goes across these. To me, there are a lot of great products, so you can use any products for any of these things, but I would highly recommend for ease of use that you have single sign-on and identity and authentication. The other cool thing is, yes, Microsoft has made it so that Office 365 spans this whole collaboration spectrum. So, okay, so let's talk about what they did. So we were just talking about it with the staff question, and the first thing they had to do, unsurprisingly, the first thing that you guys are concerned with is security and compliance. And so here they actually had regulatory rules in Europe, in the United States, that they had to follow. So they had to take a look at their systems and understand, like the person who asked the question, did the staff meet the records? Did Office 365 and other cloud tools meet the standards of the governments that they needed to stay compliant and not lose millions of dollars or pounds, and to not risk really their company, and also not risk intellectual property. So they took a look at what all of the different pressures that they were receiving and also their threshold for risk, and they decided to put their regulated email, their team sites, and their intranet into the new on-premises environment. So they were going to benefit from some of their some of the new features, but they did not want the intellectual property. They did not, and actually in essence couldn't move this specific archives and regulated email out to the cloud because they just weren't willing to take that risk. So here you can see that they used information architecture. They classified the information as regulatory compliant and risky, whatever that means to your company, because it's different to everyone. And they took those workloads and they put them into the on-premises environment. So another thing, Microsoft is dangling the cost in front of our face, and you know what? It is fantastic. I don't want anyone to think that I am not all for saving your organization money on capital expenditures, and of course paying the information and business workers more money. Yay! And hopefully that would be your pocket. Again, if you want me to be quoted on that, I can send an email to anyone's boss, and they'll laugh, I'm sure. Only in English, sorry, I can't translate it into multiple languages, and I don't think you want me to use Bing Translate. That would just be wrong. Anyway, so what is the actual total cost? And so, the actual total cost, just a sampling, can be broken into a lot of different things. Migration. So what is it going to take not only to upgrade, but to move content from one place or the other? Yes, of course, being for Metalogics, that's a sensitive topic, but actually for this presentation, what I'm more concerned about you knowing is that I'm presenting at the European SharePoint Conference in November, the slippery slope of migrating SharePoint. So, please join me for that. Really excited again. But, that's a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, hey, there's a lot that goes into this. And so it's not just, oh, you'll pay less for SharePoint by being in the cloud. That's true. You don't have user CALs anymore. But there's a lot of issues that go into it. I already asked the question about staffing. So, staffing can work both ways, right? You are changing, we can use the catchphrase DevOps. I like to talk about a solution engineer. Some people use the phrase service engineer, that you're transitioning from, I'm not an Exchange admin anymore, I'm moving to solution engineering, which is I know the top level of Exchange, SharePoint, and all the systems in Office 365. So you're getting less specific with the details that you need to have knowledge about, and you're broadening the base. What's good about that is that you're serving the customer. Again, a whole different discussion. What tools do you actually need to manage in multiple locations? I think, Active Directory and Azure can fit into this. What do you need to do to that single sign-on? Transformation, are you going to take advantage, whether it's in the cloud or not, and transform your information? Another total cost, how much is it going to cost you to get out of the ecosystem? Microsoft just came out with an API to migrate in using Azure. and that will skip some of the speed traps that they have, the throttling when you're trying to do large migrations. Yes, know this from experience. But they certainly aren't doing anything to quickly get you out of offboarding. So I think you have to take a look at that. It is different than on-premises. You're going to have a really hard time to move off the cloud. Do I think you're going to need to do that? No, but you just have to take that into consideration. So with this information, what did this organization do? Well, they realized that it would be too costly to move those workflows off of SharePoint 2010, and they realized it would be too costly to move the regulatory document and records management off of SharePoint 2010. So instead of spending the money to move the information, they made the decision to accept the risk and deal with the usability, deal with the findability, again, these information architecture principles, and to simultaneously use SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, and Office 365 and manage that in other ways. So you can see here that workload, that specific task was left in an infrastructure environment because it was the best way to do it, and it was the best way to use the efforts of the internal resources. So then, of course, we have an enjoyable user experience, and I love this. You want to balance form and function. Do you have as bad of a sense of humor as me do? Me? Yes. Okay, this is a DVD rewinder. Exactly. It's not just about being pretty. It's about balancing that form and that function, and knowing that yes, it's great for things to look good, and that's what the users want. But it must serve a need, and what is that need that it's serving? Also, you know what? I want to chime in here, and a big thing about usability is that it's not just about how pretty the SharePoint site is. People don't really complain about you moved Exchange on them, and unless they can't get to their PSTs, but that's a whole different conversation. Let them know. So we just talked about, SharePoint 2010 and the workflows are going to be there, and then their intranet is going to be in 2013. Don't hide that as an information technology organization. Let everyone know about it. And I think we can take guidance from what Microsoft actually learned from Yammer. So we now have a Office 365 roadmap. I forget when I cut this from, but they are announcing updates. They're showing you what's in development. They're showing you successful releases. There is actually a failed to launch in there. So this is an amazing behavioral change that Microsoft has learned. In one of my talks about governance, I think you should have one team site that has information about all the requests, that has what's gone out, very similar to this. And don't overlook this as a powerful tool, that communication can solve a lot of the issues when you're changing your infrastructure, when you're building, and as a part of usability, communication is needed. So of course you probably have guessed it. When focusing on ease of use, when focusing on communication, what workloads did we move? Well, yeah, pretty straightforward, right? Moved email that wasn't regulated to Office 365 using social, Yammer in the cloud, moved the extranet to work with partners into the cloud, and as I think I had mentioned before, had Dropbox and OneDrive for Business for what I called online storage. I refuse to call it enterprise file sync and share, another acronym. So, taking a look at this, for the people who were unsure, this is what you can do, and that will help you plan that you're going to put these categories. It's okay to diversify. Yes, it's a little bit easier if it's Microsoft. Oh wait, you know what? I think I've missed one. What was the title of this presentation? Hybrid. Oh, so what did they do here? Well, first of all, I'm going to beat this to death. Authentication, authorization, permissions. This is really important. Remember, we have now basically 3 different infrastructures, and that we need to be able to connect them. We need to be able to know who the users are. We need to know what their permissions are. There are a lot of tools out there to be able to do this. You need to take this into planning because this is a huge pain point. And going back to the question about, your IT staff, it's not necessarily even your IT staff. It's knowing what your general staff is doing. How can we track them? How do we really know what they're doing here? And so we certainly want to be able to take this into consideration. Why did I have this slide in here? Because we're going to end off with what they did in the middle, which is applying hybrid. So we had Active Directory in the middle to be, Azure Active Directory. Yes, it was originally called Directory Sync, and now Azure Active Directory, and there's even advanced. And here you can see that the SharePoint and Exchange are there actually as bridges to the cloud. I can tell you from being at Ignite, 2016, SharePoint 2016, Exchange 2016 are going to be built as bridges to the cloud. SharePoint 2016 specifically is the first generation of SharePoint that is taking from the cloud and putting it on premises. And what I mean by that is in the past, SharePoint 2013 was designed for on-premises, and then Office 365 was designed. And now, 2 years later, the switch has happened, that it's coming, the great technologies that are in the cloud are being applied on-premises. So on-premises is here to stay, and that might be another piece of information that people are concerned about is, will my investment go to waste? And in my opinion, it will not. That's one of the total costs that's really beneficial. Once you are in the licensing cycle for Office 365, you're getting all of your user licenses, and you just have to pay, depending on your agreement with Microsoft, you just have to pay the server licenses for installing on-premises. So really an amazing benefit to be able to do something like this organization did, which is to use the right infrastructure for the right information that was classified so that the people who use it most can get to it as quick as possible and be able to take advantage of the ease of use, the power of the cloud, the monetary advantage, and the time and effort that Microsoft is taking to bridge the gap. And so actually I didn't put in here Exchange 2007 actually exists. So I probably could do another bucket, but Exchange 2007 can communicate to Exchange 2013. They're upgrading, I think it's done now, but they were upgrading those regulated emails from 2007 to 2013, and then 2013 was being hybridized to go to the cloud. So we only have one more slide, and then if you have any other questions, we'll be able to get to them. So, what would I do? And interesting for all those planning and unsure. And I hope that the people in the cloud benefited from this information to know what they're doing and can take away a few things to look at how to maybe move forward differently. But I would, prioritize the content. What type of hybrid are you building? And realize that it's not just about on-premises to online. I certainly would move email first. I've seen great success with that. Believe it or not, OneDrive for Business has overtaken email as the #1 driver, because I think a lot of organizations like the ability to move that off their hardware and not have to worry about the volumes of data because Microsoft is giving a terabyte to each individual. That's a great thing to do, especially by the end of the year. The OneDrive for Business client will match the commercial client, which is really funny. What that means is that you should organize things by folders, because you'll be able to sync individual folders. Don't forget, you can still use metadata in OneDrive for Business, but organizing by folders will be a smart thing to do. So you can sync by folder, but that's not till the end of the year. Email, to me, there's really, someone has to log in. There are a lot of great ways to make it almost that no one will notice that you've migrated their mailboxes. What's the initial effort to move the content? So you have to identify good content. Do you want to clean? What's the actual time it's going to take to migrate content, whether email or SharePoint? Then what are you going to do if it becomes out of date? How are you going to synchronize that content? What's the business cost analysis? There's a risk of not using hybrid, right? So your customers, again, are going to go with that credit card and swipe through and put your company at risk. So what's the cost of that? How will, we talked about staff before, how will it be managed? What's the distribution of effort? Who is that solution engineer that you're going to use? And certainly, whatever tool you're using, and this is something that's the analytics coming out of Office 365 are amazing, and they'll be applied to SharePoint 2016, and I'm sure the next generation of Exchange too. But monitor usage. You've designed this system for a reason, based on input and observation. Now make sure that you look at it, and then you can either reduce your footprint in the cloud or on premises based on what you see through that monitoring usage, and that's where we end. If you're interested in learning a little more, you can find Replicator and our Cloud Acceleration Suite on the cloud. That's how I get paid to do this. So pardon the ending. And if there are any other questions, please let Declan or I know.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam, for a fantastic presentation. And we've one or two questions here. So firstly, how did users react to moving to the cloud?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, there was a little, uncertainty, and that was one of the reasons in the diagram that we saw why we still used Dropbox, because there were so many clients that were using, customers that were using Dropbox, that we didn't want to alienate them. So let's see, did I do this right? I was trying to go back to that image for a second. There we go. So here you can see, distributing the workloads. So, email was pretty straightforward. They didn't feel any pain. I think one of the key things was we synchronized their intranet and extranet so that they didn't have to actually go to two places when they were working on documents. So they worked in the intranet, they selected content, and then it replicated directly from one place to the other. So let's see if I can have some fun here. So going like that, oh, there we go. It replicated selected content back and forth. Really liked online storage. I mean, another advantage of using Office 365 and Dropbox is the accessibility and all of the phone apps that are available. So, again, it was partially about talking to the users, as we had shown at the different slide, about the what was going where, letting them know about it, and that put them at a lot of ease to be able to accept what was going on. So it took some effort, but went pretty well.
Okay, perfect. I'm conscious we're nearly at the hour, but I think we can squeeze in one more question. So, Adam, what did you think of Office 365 groups, and do you think that would have changed the situation?
That's a great question, and you know, um, whoever asked that question, but keeping up, and groups are really an amazing. I think it's an application. Microsoft's calling it infrastructure. I don't think it would change it too much, but it certainly would have changed the way we would have built the team sites, because what groups represents is the acceptance that email is king, or at least in my opinion, and this was definitely an organization that felt that way. But at the same time, because it's so new and because there were some regulatory requirements around email, I think it would have made a great entry point for those early adopters to give them a little something more to play with, but it wouldn't really have changed all that much of this implementation.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Adam, for yet again for a great presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending today. I was going to switch back to my slides, but my screen is playing tricks. But for more great webinars, make sure to check out our on-demand webinar archive. We've got over 100 great webinars, so there's sure to be something for everyone. Go to bit.ly/SP webinars, that's all lowercase, to find out more. Goodbye for now, and I hope to see you all soon on an upcoming webinar. Thank you. Bye.